welcome back to the Tiny Workshop. I am Nerfius, you might know me better as Al, and this is my Stampe-DMR. It is HPA powered, 300 FPS plus, full auto Nerf blaster. It is currently in an interesting state. I decided I wanted to change the look of it. I painted it up in kind of a rainbow paddle pop with black, and it's gross. I don't like it, so I've decided that I am going to repaint, and I thought now is a good opportunity to talk about it, show you the insides of it, talk about how it works, all the things that have been done to it to create a full auto HPA Nerf blaster, and then do the repaint, a couple of little tweaks here and there, and then I can give you a firing demo and show you what it looks like after I am potentially satisfied. Alright, so obviously this was a big project because full auto HPA Nerf blasters, there is really only one that you can purchase, and that is the Milsig M79. It is absolutely considered an imitation firearm here in Australia, and depending on which state you live in, imitation firearms are illegal without certain licensing, or an imitation firearm is perfectly legal to run around with in a park as long as you're not being a goose. However, I wanted a full auto HPA blaster, and at the time, this was going back a few years now, when the Specs-BZ was a thing and the Supercore had just become a thing. The Supercore is a semi-auto HPA engine for Nerf blasters, and I wanted full auto. There are ways that you can create a fully automatic HPA Nerf blaster using pulse width modulators and electronic solenoid control. Andrew G has a fantastic video on his version of that, which I will try and remember to link in the description down below. I did it a little bit differently. So before we get into that, let's just run over what's going on here. So you have extended length of pull on the buttstock because Stampede is just a little bit short. You have got custom foam pad cheek rest, 3 to 9 by 20 hunting scope, which is stupidly overkill, but it's zeroed for about 40 meters just by angling, and I only ever use it on 3 times power, and you can see this blaster in a previous configuration being used at our private field, and I'm using the scope. And I've overlaid scope cam footage so that you get to see what I get to see when using it, and surprisingly enough, the scope is effective and definitely usable. It's not quite as quick to acquire targets as you might otherwise have with a pair of irons or just a red dot or something like that, but you do get the sniper feels, and that's what this one was all about. We have then, moving forward, mounting rail for scope camera. Then at the front we have a Blastertech Mark II adjustable scar. Hopefully by the end of this video you will see a Nerfius scar there in place of that, because I would really like to have one of those on this blaster. Okay, paddle pop style paint, and that is essentially it for the externals. I'm going to unbutton this thing, and then I'm going to flip it open, and then we're going to talk about what the fuck is going on inside that makes this thing 300 FPS full auto HPA. Voila! What a fucking janky mess of shite. Let's talk about it in some detail. Essentially, this is a brass breech Stampede for half-length darts that no longer uses a spring to compress air and fire the projectile, the dart, out through the barrel. It now utilizes the air stored in the Specs-BZ back here behind the original plunger tube, and mechanically activate the 12-volt solenoid here to dump the tank whilst still retaining the gearbox to cycle. Okay, let's go through this in a logical order. Right. Obviously down here we have a standard Nitto fitting, which is hot glued and epoxied into the shell. 6mm hose comes up into the inlet of the 12-volt solenoid, out the outlet through a series of connections to create a 90-degree turn into the Specs-BZ, which has been carved into the shell, epoxied and hot glued in place. Hence the reason for the lovely custom cheek rest made from EVA foam from a knee pad. It both covers the Specs-BZ and creates a nice cheek rest at the same time. Then the air comes out of a piece of 16mm PVC conduit and then into the original plunger tube, which I've left the cover on for now because I will demonstrate firing and you need the cover for that. But let's remove the cover so we can just see a little bit easier. Doing this half blind, so you'll have to excuse how long this takes. Did I get them all? Yes, we did. Okay. Alright, so I'll manually cycle a little bit so you can see. 16mm PVC, and inside the plunger tube is a 20mm PVC piece because they sleeve over each other much like brass does. Then in the front of the plunger tube you have a 17/32 ring of brass, which then a 1/2 inch piece of brass is epoxied into, which is the pusher, then into a 17/32 half length breech, exactly the same design as the one that is in my brass breech Stampede video. Link to that in the description, or go and have a check through the channel to find that. Same design. So full piece of 17/32 brass, and then an extra 7 or 8 centimeters butted onto the end to create an optimal barrel length, which when you take out the breech piece you lose a significant portion of your barrel. So there is 330 millimeters of effective barrel length in this. Then onto the Blastertech Mark II adjustable scar. That is the air path. The electronics is kind of where the magic happens. So obviously the solenoid is a 12-volt solenoid powered by a 3S LiPo battery. When you pull the trigger and activate that micro switch, it drives the gearbox, which cycles the plunger tube forward as it would if it was still spring powered. And then if you can see in here, I'm not sure if you can, but there is this lock, which normally in ordinary operation activates a small lock down here in the original Stampede circuit. It now performs a different function. So when the plunger tube cycles all the way forward, you'll see the breech is closed, and now the plunger tube depresses that lock and it activates this switch here. This switch activates the solenoid and dumps the Specs-BZ at just the right time. So timing is, with any Stampede mod, everything. Now, what's currently wrong with it, and why are we opening it up to tweak with it other than paint? Well, there's nothing to control the cycle. So currently it's all trigger discipline. So if you just feather the trigger, the gearbox will rotate and move the plunger tube forward just a little bit, so you're half cycling. If you depress the trigger for just long enough, you can feed a dart but not fire it. And that is a pain in the ass. You have to pull the trigger until it cycles and fires, and then release the trigger if you want one shot. If you want full auto, less of a problem, you just keep holding the trigger. But it's all in the trigger release. If you don't release the trigger after it's fired but before it's chambered a second round, you can have issues pulling out your magazine, and then you have to cycle it again. And if you don't pull the trigger long enough, you give away your position, because Stampede is a noisy AEB. You give away your position, but you haven't fired a dart, and now the element of surprise that you may have had is gone, and you haven't tagged anyone. So I would like to investigate a way of potentially, say, flipping this switch over and putting the old lever arm back in place, so that the plunger tube keeps the trigger depressed until it returns, and then that arm releases the switch. So even if you just tap and feather the trigger, it will still complete a full cycle. That's hopefully what we can achieve out of this today, as well as fixing up its cosmetics a little bit and getting it somewhere that I'm happy with it. So without any further ado, I am going to start investigating all of that, and hopefully we will return with something that completes a full cycle for every trigger pull regardless, and looks the part. Alright, see you soon. Okay, it is the day after. I've been a busy boy, and I have remedied the issues I was talking about. So first and foremost, repositioned the micro switch. It took a little bit of, I say a little, it took a lot of janking around to get it to fit. You've got to remove a couple of pieces. You can no longer attach the cover plate, and obviously there is a whole mess of solder and overspray from painting on here. However, mount the switch in that position and it will allow you to reinstall this, which when the plunger tube goes forward, it keeps the trigger switch depressed until such time as the plunger tube retracts, and if you have let go of the trigger, the blaster will stop firing. I have connected it up to a 2S LiPo just for a cycling demonstration, so here comes the noise. Voila! No more having to control the trigger. Full auto. Fucking mint. Alright, this makes me happy. Now, I'm going to button this all back up, put all of its peripherals and bits and bobs back on there, and show you the paint scheme that I went with. And voila! Here's the thing in its final finished glory. We talked about the configuration earlier. It now has one of my nerfiest scars instead of the Blastertech adjustable Mark II, and we have tidied up the paint. So we went with a pink undercoat and then followed up on top with Brunswick green and a bright jungle green with a netting over the top of it to create what you can hopefully see, a little bit of a snake skin type effect. It particularly stands out here and here on the scope and a few other areas. I think this looks like a pretty badass looking toy. We've already seen the upgrade to the switch inside so that we get decent cycling of the firing mechanism without having to control that. Scope's been added back on, everything's back in place, and I absolutely love the way this thing turned out. I think it's pretty stunning. Basic paint pen marker to add highlights and bits and pieces here and there. And so here is the finished Stampe-DMR. A one of a kind as far as I know. Full auto, 300 plus FPS HPA Nerf blaster, which is kind of a weird hybrid between HPA and AEB. I love this thing. If you like it too, feel free to leave a comment down below and ask questions. Cool. Alright. I think I'll film a very quick firing demo of this, and then we will sign off. So I'll leave you with a firing demonstration. See you in the next one. Okay, I just quoted this thing. It's averaging around 280 feet per second. We're all zeroed in, so a little bit of a firing demo, and then we'll get to have a look at some shots of the target too and see what the group's like. Shooting offhand, of course. And we're empty.